Welcome back to another episode of Modern Cyber. I know we've been coming to you pretty regularly, but it's actually been a little while since we recorded, and I'm delighted to be coming back at you with a new guest, some new topics, some new focus as we've seen the 2024 play out and seen some of the developments in the cyberspace. Today, I am delighted to be joined by Simo Kohonen. Always a pleasure for me to welcome a fellow compatriot from my home country. Love to hear more about Simo, his career, what he's doing in deception technology. Simo, thank you so much for joining us. And for those who don't know you, just a few words of background on your bio. As far as I know, you're the founder and CEO of cyber deception company called Defused, a guest lecturer on deception for Cranfield University, part of the UK's Ministry of Defence cyber program. And Simo has done multiple media appearances on the Wall Street Journal, Yahoo, New York Post, and other sites. Simo, thank you for taking the time.
No, absolutely my pleasure, Jeremy.
Awesome. I'm really curious about that UK Ministry of Defence cyber program. Just before we kind of dive in, how did you get involved with an initiative like that?
Oh, I guess it's like a lot of things in my life. It was pure luck by meeting the right people and being at in the right place at the right time. But it's a bit fancier than it sounds, right? So I only do like one yearly guest lecture on more technical matters of cyber deception. They basically run a program for their like kinetic military people who want to make a career transition into the cybersecurity space. And then they have a very wide spectrum of different things that they look at in the cybersecurity space as a whole. And then cyber deception is one of these. And then I have a single lecture within the subcomponent of the subcomponent. So. But it's very good, you get to be very very deliberate, very thorough about cyber deception, something which maybe is not possible to do when you're doing sales calls with enterprise prospects. They expect more brevity and quicker answers.
Yeah, totally. There's a saying that I heard years ago, which is that if you ever want to really learn a topic really thoroughly, you should start teaching that topic. Because as you prepare to start teaching it, you learn all the things that you didn't know before, and you actually increase your own expertise. And I know I've actually found that to be true in my own life. So I used to teach English to migrant farm workers as one of my jobs years and years ago. And to be honest, I learned a lot more about the English language than I ever thought I would during that experience. So that's a great experience. I love hearing about that background. I guess that leads me into my next question, which is tell us a little bit about what your own career path has been and how you got involved in deception technology in the first place.
Yeah, I mean, it's not terribly exciting. So I basically jumped into the cybersecurity space straight out of university. My previous job before I was in the cyberspace was being a warehouse worker at a food warehouse. So the transition gap, if you want to call it that, was fairly large. There was a lot of pain and learning, but I did study computer science at university, so I did have a semi-decent background in computing and understanding the systems and things like that, which was a good way to move into the cybersecurity space. And I guess I'm a bit like a restless personality, so I figured like cybersecurity sounds very dynamic and cool, and you probably can rattle sabers with some evil people, which maybe didn't turn out to be entirely as true as I thought it was, but
Yep.
I'm still glad. It's a good discipline.
Yeah. And what made you pick, cybersecurity is a very broad field as well. Yes, it's very dynamic. It's always changing year to year, and there's new technologies coming all the time. But within the cybersecurity domain, there's a gazillion things, right? I used to work in cloud security. Now I work in API security. I've also spent time looking at SIMs and, CNAP platforms and all these different things. What specifically drew you towards this field of deception technology? And I guess, was there like an original problem that you saw where you thought, oh yeah, deception technology would be really useful for this kind of problem?
Yeah, I think it was much more anarchistic than that. I thought, well, so as a background, like a lot of people who get into more operational, more technical cybersecurity matters, they tend to play around with things like honeypots, which are a very good like entry level concept. You set one up and you direct some traffic into one. And then you sort of get like an intuitive idea of, okay, this is how network traffic looks like, this is how logging looks like, this is what to expect when someone someone tampers with your systems. And it was a bit of the same thing. I was very naturally interested in this area, which is a horrible way to start a company, right? You always want to go for customer demand first instead of your own interests. But I disregarded that and decided to do what I perceive to be something that's very cool to work on. But as it turns out, like there are a lot of benefits in the cyber deception space, specifically which tend to be like also big enterprise problems for which it is a very good solution for. So very early in the trajectory of the company, we went to a couple of these different cyber accelerators, things like that. Got some early exposure into the customer space. Started better understanding, how it is that they actually operate within these kind of organizational cybersecurity units. It's very different, when you read the theory from a textbook, you have all of these concepts like, confidentiality, integrity, availability, all of that. And then you jump into the operational side, the enterprise security teams or the lonely sysadministrator in the small and mid-sized companies. And they deal with these things, but it's a very different reality. I think like cybersecurity and actually like operational cybersecurity in organizations are almost two completely different disciplines. But to your original point, I digressed there a bit. It turns out that there are some good answers cyber deception can provide, which a lot of these organizations struggle with. Situational awareness being a huge thing. A lot of people who walk into security teams inherit large amounts of infrastructure where they have absolutely no clue. There's no logging. They don't know what's happening. And of course, in today's ever evolving and dynamic world of cyber threats, you have to be quite quick to spot things. Actors tend to execute their attacks fairly quickly end to end these days. It's not a matter of them taking 3 months anymore. It's down to a few days or even a few hours in some cases. So that there was a good match, and then from there, it was a fairly standard startup. Introduce some concepts and get battered by the market, and then you reiterate and do a bit of different thing. So even though we've been working on the cyber deception space for quite a long, like the product has gone a number of very thorough iterations, making it a completely different product.
Well, let's talk through some of the details there, and then I want to come back to that point that you raised around situational awareness, because I think I have an idea of what you might mean, but I want to get into that in a little bit more detail. But before we do that, let's walk through this kind of step by steps to make sure that I understand this. Because honestly, neither honeypots nor deception technology are something that I know a lot about. I've heard the names for both, but just as a starter, how are they different from each other? I guess honeypots is something that I heard about earlier, so it's probably been around a lot longer. But like, how are honeypots and modern deception technology different from each other?
So the simple answer is that deception technology is, we can start from deception. Like, what is deception? It is essentially deliberately inducing erroneous sense making to a target or an adversary so that you can gain some advantage. So on a top level, like deception is a methodology of doing things. It's not strictly a thing like a honeypot. I think a good analogy here is like a honeypot is a hammer and deception is the toolbox you keep it in. So a honeypot is one way to do deception, but then there's a ton of different things you can do in the deception domain so that you can fool the adversary and gain some advantage. And most of the time in the cybersecurity space, it tends to flow down into the detection domain. So you want to place different type of deception elements in your infrastructure so that you can, with very high fidelity, pick up bad activity as early as possible in the kind of broader attack chain.
Okay. And so then, aside from honeypots, which I usually understand to be kind of like deliberately vulnerable targets that an attacker can kind of get to, but they're like separate from the actual, let's say, valuable data or the intellectual property that an organization might have. So attacker somehow compromises your network, gets access to the network. They go towards this honeypot instead of going where you don't want them to go. Is that a kind of a correct baseline understanding of what a honeypot is, or the
Yeah,
purpose of a honeypot?
I think that's a very good description. I mean, it is like mentioned in the description about deception. It is a lot about fooling and misdirecting the adversary, drawing them away from legitimate assets. These types of things. So definitely,
Okay.
it's a good description.
And I've heard historically, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I've heard historically that this usually means like some kind of dummy server or virtual machine that's running against some vulnerability or something like that that is easily discoverable on a network.
Yeah, that is one kind of thing you can do in the deception domain, and that's kind of what the classical honeypot is and was, in that they tended to be network level things, usually servers or maybe an open SSH port or a FTP server, things like that. But of
Okay.
course, if we go back to the top level description of deception being that it's a methodology where you fool the adversary, then of course you can apply that to any part of your infrastructure. You can create fake users on Active Directory. You can create fake files or honey files, as some might call them, on Windows endpoints or Linux endpoints, for example. So if somebody goes tampering with those, you have a good indicator that somebody's touching things they shouldn't be touching. You can
Yep.
definitely also do deception in the API domain. Like as you well know, a lot of companies have trillions and trillions of API endpoints, and it's sometimes tough to keep track of what type of activity is flowing into them. Maybe not with if they're using your tool, but as a general principle. And of course, you could expose like fake API endpoints to pinpoint if any like scanning activity or anything similar like that might be going on. It gives you a very good signal because it comes sort of overlaid with this ready-made context, this ready-made proof that there is a fake thing that somebody's touching that they shouldn't be touching in any case. And that sort of wraps it around into a high trustworthy context if you look at it from a alert point of view. So you can
Yep.
already have this proof that this activity has this context of somebody tampering around with assets that aren't even real, which from a situational awareness point of view, that gives you a very elevated position when you start to triage activity on the network or on an endpoint or wherever you're applying the deception.
Got it. And so I guess the point is that for any of these things, whether it's an API endpoint or a file or a user or whatever, an open SSH port, the point is that you then set that up to alert the security team that there has been access or there's been usage of this identity or this file has been opened or whatever. And under normal operating conditions, that would not be the case. But these things, if they get open, that's indicative that you've got some kind of intruder within your environment.
That is so, at least in 99% of the cases. Of course,
Okay.
there's certain corner cases like you might have a sysadministrator who's scanning a network with a scanning tool and then hits everything. But
Yep.
these are well-known cases, and especially with the customers we work with, we can weed them out up front by filtering and sort of reduce the likelihood of that happening to close to zero. So.
Gotcha. And how has deception technology kind of changed as as with the advent of the cloud, for instance, and with the advent of like very dynamic environments that are changing all the time?
Yeah. So I think anytime there's a large what do you want to call it, like a change in a paradigm change or pick your business jargon to describe it, but
Yep.
what it usually does is it introduces new attack surface for the people operating it, and of course that opens up new questions about the situational awareness. So if you have a large cloud infrastructure and it's fresh, you don't really have a whole lot of logging here. You don't necessarily even know how the cloud works. It's kind of in many places like it's a bit difficult to figure out how that stuff works internally, how the networks are mapped, all that. So it introduces all of these same problems that any other type of on-premise network might have, which is do you know what's happening in your assets or not? and of course, as it is for on-premise environments, also for cloud environments, deception again can provide the same answers there, the same sort of high fidelity as they call it, like detection of bad activity. So again, it's a methodology. You can with the right tools you can apply it anywhere. The deception element itself, they will look different. For something on premise, you might stand up like fake deception elements for AD, and then for the cloud, they might be things like S3 buckets or any other cloud computing elements. So that's kind of the difference. It moves into a technical domain, but the same deception principles can absolutely be applied also into the cloud side.
Okay. I'm kind of curious. I know you've been working on this for a couple of years. I'm curious if you have any fun stories of weird or curious things that you've seen in customer environments that you can talk about. I always find this to be one of the most fascinating elements. For instance, for us, and we talked about this a little bit in our State of API Security that we released a few months back. But one of the craziest things that I've seen around APIs is that we're starting to see API payloads that include bash scripts, API payloads coming from nation state aligned actors. So we see traffic out of North Korea. We see traffic out of, traffic that we have a high level of confidence that we believe comes out of North Korea or Iran and Russia, for instance. We see traffic including malware, server-side request forgery attempts to download malware to a local host and things like that within API payloads, which was super surprising to me. I always think of APIs as being these things that kind of transact data or maybe invoke a business function. It's like create this user profile, update this user profile, trigger a payment transaction and things like that. Not like change directory, change permissions, go to this website, download this piece of malware. So that was something really surprising that really caught our eye as we were analyzing some of our customer data earlier this year. But again, I'm curious what you've seen on the deception side.
Well, there's a very good example we can flow on from the same train of thought here, which is that, for instance, network level deception things, honeypots, or we call them decoys, to distinguish ourselves from the open source variants. But of course, this same type of thing applies. People tend to shoot all kinds of weird bash scripts into them that try to establish reverse shells and things like that.
Yeah.
And of course, because a honeypot is essentially it can be like a fake computing asset, for instance, a printer or a router or anything like that. But then it also can be a web server, something more classical. And something that we do in the platform is we also in some cases attach like a sandbox to it. So if somebody shoots a script or tries to abuse a vulnerability which embeds a attempt to execute code remotely, we can actually do that in a very safe way inside the sandbox and watch what the attackers do in sort of real time. And this is interesting because you can actually this jumps a bit into the threat intelligence domain, but there is this concept of like a pyramid in the threat intel domain, where at the bottom you have these very basic indicators that in themselves are interesting, but they don't really tell you a story. And then it builds up more abstraction as it goes upwards, and at the top level you have like the coolest thing you can derive from a threat intel perspective. And I may be butchering this because I'm not a threat intel expert, so someone may reprimand me for it. But at the very top, you have like attacker motivations and tools and techniques and these kind of like higher level concepts you want to understand about the attacker. And if you have a suitable deception environment with a good honeypot, you attach a sandbox to it, and you see an attacker coming in, and you replay their attack in the sandbox, you let them in and you observe them. This is the type of stuff you can see. And one thing that we talked about publicly and we saw was that a attacker tried to exploit, I forget which vulnerability, but we had a simulator for that, so we were able to simulate the vulnerability exploit working. We let them into the sandbox. They had like a multi-stage attack where they downloaded first a a kit of some kind, and then it executed a number of other things. It ended up being a crypt loader, which is not super exciting. But the really cool thing was that you could see all of these steps coming into the sort of like larger alerting panel, or the at that stage, we call multiple alerts like a larger incident. So you had this really cool story build up almost automatically, which established full context of, okay, you have this adversary. They tried to exploit this specific vulnerability. When they got in, they did, steps X, Y, Z, and it turns out their motivation was to exploit this server because they wanted to install a crypto miner and start abusing your computing resources for that. So that's one really cool thing you can do. I think, especially with the more advanced deception solutions, I think. And it goes also back to this what distinguishes some of the open source honeypots from like larger deception platforms is that you can build these larger capabilities into them for educating the defenders better about what's happening. And there's a lot of valuable lessons to learn there. If you stop them at the first alert, you might never figure out like what the full motivation was. But if you have these deeper sandbox environments, you can build a lot of contextual knowledge about what they're trying to do, and that will posture you better for future defenses.
Interesting. And so as you were watching this play out, you're literally seeing each command line kind of command being attempted and I guess successfully executed. You let the first stages of the attack kind of play out successfully?
Yes, that's right. Because it's a fake environment. We've sandboxed it very well. It self-terminates. So you have this period of time where you can sort of let them freely play around and see what they try to do, and then you cut them loose. And depending on the defending organization, they might have next steps from there. They might quarantine systems or things like that. But there is this period where you sort of, and it's fully optional, but you can let them sort of execute the bit so you can actually learn from the attacker motivations.
And do you think organizations worry about things like initial access brokers, and maybe they go through an exercise where they think they've compromised an organization based on the feedback of some decoy, and then they go onto a dark web forum and they say, hey, we've compromised company XYZ, who wants to buy access? Is that a risk or a threat to that organization, or is it more like, kind of laughing at the adversary in a sense that, you think you got something, and criminals buying from criminals, you get what you pay for?
Well, from our perspective, it's one of the coolest things you can do. Like you've preemptively completely prevented any kind of attack happening. The adversary exploited some edge device and they stole fake credentials, and what's better, they tried to sell them on the market. I think that's not the standard use case. I think it's reserved to more more sophisticated security teams who have the time and resources to do these type of things. But I think it's a increasing trend. I think a lot more security teams are looking at this kind of almost like I don't know what you want to call it, like preemptive detection or preemptive intelligence, things like that. Edge devices are a hugely popular exploit vector right now. I think alongside phishing, they are the most popular initial access vector right now. So it makes a lot of sense for security teams to also look at the perimeter and what they can do there from a deception standpoint. And it's actually very easy to set up. So
yeah. And how do you what are you seeing with AI today? Because I can imagine, in the API security space, we talk about actually there's two sides of it. There's some positives that are coming for sure, but there's also a lot of negatives. There's the fact that it's pretty easy to provide an AI with a piece of documentation, something like an API spec file, and ask it to craft queries for that. And with a little bit of prompting and a little bit of, let's say, prompt engineering, or let's say providing a piece of malware to the prompt, you can get it to attempt a bunch of attacks pretty quickly against any API. And I can see that there would probably be both positives and negatives on this deception technology side as well. But what are you seeing, and how do you think about this problem?
I think from a deception standpoint, it's still a kind of a nascent area, but I do have some interesting ideas. I think at least, and one of the sort of I think guaranteed things is the attackers will get the same benefits from AI as the defenders, which probably means that they will be able to execute like rote attacks much faster than they did previously if they have the right tools, if they develop the right tools for that. And I think it's kind of a accepted truth that if you push aside the nation state actors, the 0 days and they're like really far out stuff, which most organizations they don't really see, right? It's more like a lot of the ransomware actors, for instance, they have fairly standard tools and methodologies that they apply in their attacks, and then they succeed because people don't pick up this stuff quickly enough. And so if you apply the AI there, which for most like rote computing work, it has the capability of speeding this up quite a bit.
Right.
So I think that's sort of the big risk here. Like I don't know the as of today like what the average ransomware execution time is. I know it's floated between like 5 days, 3 days end to end. So from initial access, how long do they take to actually ransom everything? And I think if you think about scenarios like that, which are a big problem, you might see something like the execution time dropping from 3 days into like 12 hours or even like 4 hours as the adversary tools get better. So I think the big danger is there, and of course, again, I'm super biased. I will admit it instantly, but of course, I think deception has a very good answer here for two reasons. One is that one of the big perks of deception is early detection, because you can get these trustworthy signals of hey, there's some weird activity that's hitting all of our deception elements on the infrastructure. Like we should immediately either investigate or maybe trigger a response from a SOAR platform or whatever is in the defenders tool stack. There's a definite benefit here if attackers become massively faster, which is kind of a logical conclusion for the AIs. And I think the second interesting thing is, which we didn't talk too much about, but like if you have deception in place, it's effectively a bit like you get the ability to lie to the adversary. And so if they are using an artificial brain like an LLM, and you have the chance to feed them misinformation, you can use that to your advantage to actually point the very quick computing actions, for instance, in a completely wrong place. Like you can tell them, you might have let's say, take a hypothetical, you have a LLM which is attached to an Nmap and is trying to figure out like what kind of assets you have on the have on the network, and then you present it without deception. It's going to instantly know this is the lay of the land and it's 100% correct. And then you apply deception, and you can put some like really like super high vulnerable things in there to try to entice it to initially go in this direction. And once it goes there, then you can quickly, again, depending a bit on what kind of posture you have, like very quickly eliminate access to all of the other parts. So I think there's also that if artificial brains like LLMs become more prevalent in attacker tool sets, then you can very definitely get a lot of benefit from providing this information to them in a neatly packaged way like deception can do. So I think those are the sort of two very interesting future things we are looking at from a deception standpoint.
On that second point, I'm really curious. I mean, do I understand you right if I'm thinking about this? Like, okay, so let's say we're 100% Linux shop in terms of our server infrastructure. We're Linux and primarily open source technologies for, I don't know, our databases and things like that. But maybe from a deception perspective, we'd actually want to present decoys that indicate that we're a Microsoft shop and that we use SQL Server and we use Windows Server and so on in order to attract those types of attacks instead of the right attacks, or is that not the right way to think about it?
I don't think I don't think there's a boilerplate template to go towards, but I think at least if you, again, I like to dip a lot into the ransomware attacks because they're kind of topical and highly disruptive. And if you look at what they do, they go a lot for the same type of popular targets, like
Yeah.
very well-known vulnerabilities, RDP, things like that. So if you put the juicy targets there, which are popular, that's usually a very good strategy. But then you can derive different type of data also if you put things that resemble your infrastructure. So you can also like cover for visibility gaps if you have a lot of like networking gear, things like that, where typically defenders don't have any kind of like monitoring capabilities installed. It's usually also a good idea to replicate that a bit so you can pick up activity if there's an attacker who's for instance trying to avoid like endpoints and just trying to move laterally across networking devices, which is also I think one very prevalent trend. Avoiding the highly secured areas which tend to be running EDR solutions. So it's a bit of a mixed bag. You want to put the apparent low hanging fruit there, but you also want to do a bit of replication of what you have, so you can cover visibility as much as possible.
Got it. Got it. And do you think the coding copilots help to create new decoys faster and give, defenders the ability to kind of very quickly spin up new decoys of different types based on, let's say, like newly discovered exploits or newly discovered vulnerabilities?
Oh, very much so. At least we use it a lot because this depends a bit on how you do deception. Like, and it's a whole new rabbit hole we probably shouldn't go into. But you can run full blown real systems and try to record everything that happens in them, and that's sort of what you
Yeah.
call a high interaction decoy. And then you can do emulations, which are much more lightweight. They have a slightly more narrow capability of picking up activity because their emulations they have predefined actions built into them that the attacker can go towards. But if it's not one of those, then usually log some initial indicator and that's it. So
Got it.
especially if you go the emulation route, which is what we do because it reduces the risk of things going wrong
Yep.
dramatically. You can definitely use the co-pilots and chat GPTs to help sort of speed up that process. Absolutely.
Got it. And how do you see AI shaping this space over the next 1, 2, 3 years?
Well, there's some really cool ideas to explore that I think AI makes very viable in the deception space. I think one of them is very prevalent for breaches to involve some kind of data theft component, and of course AIs are very good at creating synthetic data, and so with suitable modeling of the infrastructure and appropriately placed data deception things, we'd like to imagine a scenario where an attacker exfiltrates a number of gigabytes of completely synthetic data. Even though they manage to breach into the organization and they manage to steal something, it ends up being a fully deception-based loot for them, so they don't actually win anything. So I think there's a lot of these areas where deception can contribute very meaningfully. If there's any developers listening to your podcast, everyone knows that previously this was done with the Python faker library,
Yeah.
but now you have a much more versatile set of options to generate synthetic data. And I think that's at least something that we're looking very close towards right now.
Okay. Very cool. Well, Simo Kohonen, it's been a pleasure having you on Modern Cyber today. I thank you so much for taking me through that topic and educating me on deception technology, kind of past, present, and future. If people want to learn more about you, about the work that you and your team are doing, what's the best place for them to visit?
I think they can start at our website, defusedcyber.com.
Okay.
Feel free very much to link with me on LinkedIn. I'm also on Twitter quite a bit. These kind of typical social medias. Very happy to always have conversations, and to your former point, an absolute pleasure to be a part of the podcast. Very much appreciate it.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, thanks again for taking the time to join us here on Modern Cyber. To our audience, stay tuned for the next episode out in a week or so. There might be a gap of a week or two coming up here as we get into the holiday season. But for myself and for everybody here at the Firetel team that helps put the podcast together, thanks again for taking the time. Please do us a favor, rate, review, share, like, subscribe, all that good stuff. You know what to do on your podcast platform of choice, and we will talk to you next time. Bye-bye.